"Dad, sit down here for a minute. We want to talk to you for a moment," said my daughter Laura, in that sweet but forced tone, like someone preparing a punch and wrapping it in velvet. I sat down on the porch of my own house, smiling. I thought it was some surprise for the Easter trip I had planned and paid for myself. But the surprise was something else. "Look, we talked a lot and came to the conclusion that maybe it's not a good idea for you to go on this trip." I was silent for a moment. I thought it was a joke. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "It's just that you've been feeling unwell, right? You go to bed early, complain about the heat, and are bothered by noise. The boys want to have fun. We voted and thought it would be best for you to rest here at home." The final sentence was the last straw. We voted. It wasn't a conversation. It was a unilateral decision made behind my back, as if I were a piece of furniture they had decided to leave at home. My name is Frank Thompson, and at 74 years old, I never imagined I would be discarded by my own family like a dead weight. I am a retired civil engineer. I built a company from scratch. I raised 2 daughters on my own after my wife passed away 5 years ago. For decades, I was the pillar that sustained every dream, every crisis, every whim of this family. And on that Good Friday morning, the day I was supposed to board a plane with them for a vacation I had paid for, planned and waited months for, I discovered that I had become nothing more than an inconvenient old man. I had bought the tickets, booked the hotel, paid for new suitcases, including Laura's. I planned outings with my grandchildren in mind, even took my daughter's diet into consideration, making sure the resort had vegan options. And yet, I was discarded like a burden. "You understand, right, Dad? It's better this way," she said, with an expression that mixed guilt and relief. I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I just got up, calmly picked up my suitcase, took out my few items, some light clothes, my cap, my medicine, my water bottle, and put it back in the closet. Laura watched me, clearly satisfied that I had understood without drama. I nodded with a half smile. One of those smiles that doesn't come from joy, but from certainty, the certainty that something had changed forever. It was then that my grandson Felipe, the same boy I taught to ride a bike and swim, laughed and said, "Phew, now it's going to be fun." That stuck like a rusty nail in my flesh. I realized then that it wasn't just rejection, it was celebration of my absence. They were relieved that I wasn't with them. I went back to the sofa, turned on the television, and waited, not for the news, but for them to leave the house. Because from then on, everything would be planned down to the last detail. They didn't know it yet, but they had just signed their own death warrant. I would see them cry, not out of malice, but out of justice. Because the man they think only knows how to watch TV was still the owner of everything. And in my head, the plan was already in motion. I saw each one carry their bags, all bought by me. The car they used to leave was the same one I had paid off as a gift to make the family's routine easier. Now that same car was leaving me behind, filled with laughter and a euphoria that only existed because of my exclusion. When the electronic gate closed, the sound of my breathing was the only thing left. I went inside, closed the curtains, and turned off the Wi-Fi. They thought they had one, that the old man would be left behind while they celebrated. But they forgot who built every inch of that structure, who still held the invisible threads of comfort that kept them arrogant. If you're following this story of how a family can be cruel to those who love them most, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see how this situation unfolds. While they laughed in the car on the way to the airport, I was already deciding which button to press first. Because yes, I was already taking action. And their trip had barely begun, but it was already doomed. I was still the pilot of the plane that carried them. As the car's engine disappeared into the distance, carrying my family to the vacation I had financed, I stood there on the porch watching the dust settle on the asphalt. It wasn't just the sound of the engine fading away, it was the echo of 3 decades being erased in a single morning. Laura had always been my favorite child, though I never admitted it out loud. After we lost her mother 5 years ago, she became the matriarch of the family, organizing reunions, coordinating holidays, keeping everyone together. At least that's how I saw it. But now, looking back over every decision made in the last few months, I realized that Laura wasn't holding the family together, she was systematically isolating me. The first clue had been last Christmas. During dinner, when I started telling the story of how I built my first house in 1972, Felipe rolled his eyes and said, "Grandpa, you've told that story about 10 times. Laura laughed and said, "Dad, you're getting repetitive. How about letting the young people talk?" I swallowed the humiliation at the time, thinking it was just youthful impatience. Then came Laura's birthday in February. I had prepared a heartfelt speech about how she had become a strong woman after her mother's death. But when I stood up to speak, her husband Roger interrupted me. "Frank, how about we save the speeches for later? The food is getting cold." Everyone laughed. I sat silently, saving my words for a moment that never came. The third was during the planning of this Easter trip. I had suggested we visit the same resort where Laura spent her honeymoon, thinking it would be a nice tribute to her memory. But she cut me off mid-sentence. "Dad, that's in the past. We want to make new memories, not revisit old ones." Roger, my son-in-law, has always been a problem masquerading as a solution. He works in sales, the kind who talks loudly in restaurants and always has an opinion on everything. Over the past 2 years, I've noticed how he always physically positioned himself between me and family conversations. When I spoke, he checked his cell phone. When I offered advice based on 40 years of experience in construction, he smiled condescendingly and changed the subject. "The old man is going senile," I heard him whisper to Laura during last Thanksgiving, when he thought I couldn't hear him. And Laura? Instead of defending me, she just sighed and said, "I know. It's hard to see him like this." Hard to see me like what? Hard to see the man who paid for her college education, who put a down payment on the house where she lives, who watches her grandchildren every Thursday so she can have time for her book club. Felipe, my oldest grandson, used to be my fishing buddy. For years, it was our tradition to head out to the lake every Saturday morning. He would tell me about school, girlfriends, his dreams of becoming an engineer like his grandfather. But over the last 6 months, those trips have turned into a war of silence. He was on his cell phone the whole time, answered my questions in monosyllables, and sighed every time I tried to share a fishing technique. "Grandpa, that's an old man's thing," he said the last time we went fishing together, when I tried to teach him the not my own father taught me. An old man's thing. As if my experience were a contagious disease. My youngest granddaughter, Sophie, 15, has simply ignored me for over a year. When I walk into the room, she leaves. When I try to talk to her, she puts on her headphones. Laura always justifies it. "Dad, that's how teenagers are. Don't take it personally." But I know when someone is avoiding me out of genuine contempt, not because they're going through a teenage phase. What hurt the most was realizing that they had created a version of me in their heads, the boring, repetitive, out-of-touch old man. And worse, they felt justified in treating me based on this caricature they had constructed. During this morning's meeting on the porch, when Laura said, "We voted," I realized that this vote had not taken place yesterday. It had been going on for months, maybe years. Every glance exchanged when I spoke, every conversation interrupted when I came near, every time they changed the subject when I offered an opinion. They didn't exclude me from the trip today. They excluded me from the family gradually, and today they just made it official. The cruel irony is that everything they found inconvenient about me, my age, my slowness, my tendency to tell old stories, came with something they loved to use: my money, my resources, my house, my car. When Roger needed a loan to start his own business, it wasn't the senile old man who was signing the checks. It was "Frank, you're a lifesaver." When Laura wanted to remodel the kitchen, it wasn't the out-of-touch man who was paying for the imported tiles. It was "Dad, you have impeccable taste." When Felipe wanted the latest iPhone, it wasn't the old man who was at the mall. It was "Grandpa, you're the best in the world." But now, at the first opportunity to have pure fun without financial compensation, I was the deadweight that was getting in the way of the experience. I went back into the house and closed the door. The silence that greeted me was not empty, it was full of possibilities. They thought they had left me behind, but in fact they had freed me from any obligation to continue supporting their ingratitude. While they celebrated in the car on the way to the airport, probably joking about how relaxing it would be not to have to worry about me, I was discovering something dangerous. The clarity that comes when you stop trying to please people who don't value you. The phone rang. It was my younger brother, David, calling from Seattle as he had every Friday for 15 years. "Hey, Frank. Excited for the family vacation?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, Dave, plans have changed. I'm staying home." "What do you mean? You were really looking forward to this trip?" "It's a long story," I replied. And it was. But it was still being written. What they didn't know was that the man they considered obsolete still controlled every aspect of the infrastructure that kept their lives comfortable. And now, for the first time in decades, I was motivated to use that control. Not out of malice. Out of politeness. After I hung up the phone with David, I sat in silence for almost an hour. The house was too quiet, not the peaceful silence I used to enjoy, but an emptiness that echoed with 3 decades of memories being rewritten. I picked up my phone and opened the family WhatsApp group. Messages were coming in one after another, all full of excitement and photos from the airport. Laura had posted a selfie in the lobby. Finally. Family vacation. Roger shared a photo of the drinks they were having at the airport bar, starting the vacation off right. Felipe sent a video showing the departure area. Man, what a huge airport. I can't wait to get to the beach. And Sophie, who hadn't spoken to me in months, was excitedly sharing stories about the trip. Each message was a stab in the heart. Not because of the trip itself, but because of the genuine joy they showed at my absence. It was as if I were a handbrake that had finally been released. Then came the message that broke any lingering doubt I still had. Roger wrote, "Man, I'm glad Frank stayed home. Now we can really enjoy ourselves without listening to stories about how everything was better in the 70s. Felipe replied with a laughing emoji and added, "True. And we won't have to talk quietly because Grandpa is tired. It's going to be epic." Laura, instead of defending her own father, simply reacted with a heart emoji to her husband's message. My vision blurred for a moment. Not from tears, I was past the crying stage, but from a rage so pure that it seemed to clear my thoughts rather than cloud them. That was it, then. I wasn't just inconvenient, I was an inside joke. I closed the app and called my lawyer, Robert Chun, a competent man who had represented me for 15 years. "Frank. How are you? I thought you were traveling with your family today." "Change of plans, Robert. I need you to come over to my house today. It's urgent." "Sure. Did something happen? You sound different." "You could say that. I need to review some important documents. Power of attorney, will, some property issues." There was a pause on the other end. Robert knew me well enough to understand that when I spoke in that tone, I meant business. "I can be there in 2 hours. Does this have anything to do with Laura?" "It has to do with dignity, Robert. My dignity." While waiting for the lawyer, I called my bank manager, a young man named Marcus Peterson who always treated me with the respect I deserved, probably because he saw my bank statement every month. "Mr. Thompson. I hope you're enjoying your vacation. Actually, Marcus, I need to make some urgent changes to my account. Can I stop by in an hour?" "Sure. What kind of changes?" "I'm going to remove some names from my additional cards and make adjustments to some automatic authorizations." When I arrived at the bank, Marcus greeted me in his private office. He immediately noticed that something was different. "Sir, are you sure you want to remove Laura from all access? She's been your attorney for years." "No longer," I replied firmly. "And I want all additional cards cancelled immediately. Not blocked, cancelled." "All of them? But that includes Roger's card for business emergencies, Sophie's for school." "All of them, Marcus. And I want real-time alerts of any attempt to use the old cards." The young man typed nervously. "Mr. Thompson, may I ask, has there been a security issue?" "You could say that," I replied. "A family security issue." When I left the bank, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't revenge yet, it was recovery. Recovery of my own decision-making power. On the way home, I stopped at the travel agency. I had known Helen, the manager, for over a decade. She had handled all our family travel since my wife died. "Frank. What a surprise to see you here. I thought you were flying to the Caribbean today." "Actually, Helen, I need to make some changes to the reservation." "Of course. Is there a problem with the rooms?" "I want to cancel everything." Helen blinked several times. "I'm sorry, cancel what exactly?" "The entire trip. Tickets, hotel, transfers, tours, everything." "But Frank, the family must be at the airport by now. The fare is non-refundable at this point." "I'm the one who made the reservation, Helen. Everything is in my name, paid for with my card. I can cancel whenever I want." "Well, technically yes, but..." "Then cancel it." Now. Helen hesitated, but started typing. Frank, can I ask what happened? You guys seemed so excited about this trip. Let's just say there's been a change in perspective on the concept of family. When Robert came home 2 hours later, I had already made coffee and organized all the documents on the living room table. Frank, you look 10 years younger, was the first thing he said. Funny, I feel 10 years wiser. We spent the next 3 hours reviewing every document that connected my financial life to my daughter. Power of attorney revoked. Cards cancelled. Insurance beneficiaries changed. And we began drafting changes to the will. Are you sure about this, Frank? These decisions are hard to reverse. Robert, do you have children? I have a 22-year-old daughter. If she looked you in the eye and told you that you were a dead weight who got in the way of her fun, and then celebrated your absence publicly, would you keep her as your beneficiary? Robert was silent for a long moment. I see your point. At 7 o'clock that evening, when Robert left, I was officially free of any financial obligation to my family. They didn't know it yet, but they had just discovered what it really meant to be independent. I prepared a simple dinner for myself, something I hadn't done in years, since I always ate whatever Laura decided was age-appropriate for her father. It was while I was cutting a steak, a real steak, not the protein substitutes Roger insisted were healthier for older people, that my cell phone rang. It was a call from an international number. Probably from the resort in the Caribbean. I answered. Mr. Thompson? This is Maria from the front desk at Paradise Resort. I have your family here, but it seems there's been a problem with the reservation. I could hear raised voices in the background. Laura's voice, clearly frustrated, saying something about misunderstanding and resolving this immediately. Maria, I said calmly, there's no misunderstanding. I canceled the reservation this afternoon. Oh, I see. Well, your daughter is insisting that this was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. And Maria? They are not authorized to make new reservations on my behalf. Good evening. I hung up the phone and went back to my dinner. The steak was perfect. That night, while watching a documentary on engineering, something I hadn't been able to do in years because it was boring for young people, my cell phone exploded with calls and messages. I didn't answer any of them. For the first time in decades, I was exactly where I wanted to be, in control of my own life. The man they thought should be sitting quietly watching TV was finally running the show. And tomorrow's episode would be even more interesting. All night long, my phone vibrated incessantly. 43 missed calls, 17 voice messages, and a WhatsApp group that exploded in despair. But I didn't answer any of them. Each vibration was like music to my ears. The sound of reality finally catching up with people who had lived so long in a bubble of privilege. The next morning, while drinking my coffee in absolute peace, I decided to listen to one of the voice messages. It was from Laura, and her voice trembled in a way I hadn't heard in years. Dad, please answer the phone. I don't know what happened, but all our cards have been canceled. We're stranded at the Miami airport. The hotel canceled our reservation and, Dad, please, we need help. I deleted the message and listened to the next one. It was from Roger, and the tone was very different, aggressive, accusatory. Frank, what the hell did you do? You can't cancel our trip like this. Are you crazy? We've been here for 15 hours trying to sort this mess out. Call us now. The third message was from Felipe, my grandson, and finally I heard something I never thought I'd hear from him. Grandpa, I'm sorry for everything we said. Please help us get home. We're sleeping at the airport and Mom is crying. Interesting how the word sorry comes up quickly when comfort disappears. But it was the messages in the family group that really showed me what these people were made of. Roger had written, his daughter is embarrassing herself here because of a childish tantrum. What kind of father does that? Laura had replied, he's always been dramatic. Let's try to work this out ourselves. And Felipe, the boy who had apologized to me in his individual message, wrote in the group, Grandpa is being ridiculous. I mean, it's just a trip. That's when I realized, they still didn't understand. They still thought it was about the trip. They still saw me as the problem, not the solution they had lost. I called my insurance broker, Bradley Williams, a competent man who had handled all my policies for over a decade. Frank, how's the vacation? Change of plans, Bradley. I need to make some urgent adjustments to the policies. Sure. What kind of adjustments? I want to remove Laura as the beneficiary on all insurance policies. Life insurance, home insurance, car insurance. Everything. There was a long pause. Frank, that's a very significant decision. May I ask why? Let's just say I've discovered that gratitude isn't hereditary. Bradley, professional as always, processed the changes without further questions. Within 2 hours, Laura had lost access to nearly $200,000 in insurance that I had paid for religiously for 20 years. But that was just the beginning. I called my accountant, Stephen Rodriguez, and scheduled a meeting for Monday. We needed to review not only the will, but the entire financial structure I had built around my family. Stephen, I need to understand exactly how much money Laura and her family have spent for my resources over the past 5 years. That's going to require a full audit, Frank. Credit cards, wire transfers, loan payments. Do it. I want every penny documented. On Saturday afternoon, Robert returned with the finalized documents. We sat on the porch, the same one where Laura had humiliated me 48 hours earlier, and reviewed every page. Frank, are you sure you want to remove Laura completely from the will? What about your grandchildren? Robert, do you have children who treat you like an ATM with legs? No. Then you don't understand. They celebrated my exclusion. They literally celebrated getting away from me. Why would I leave my entire life's work to people who think I'm a deadweight? I signed the new documents with a steady hand. 75% of my estate would go to my nephew David in Seattle, a 32-year-old who called me every week, visited every Christmas, and never asked me for a penny. The rest would go to charity. Laura and her family? Zero. If you're following this story, subscribe to the channel to see how this family discovered that actions have consequences and that respect is not optional in a healthy family relationship. Meanwhile, in the family group, the messages kept coming. They had borrowed money from some friends to get home, but they discovered another problem: the car. Roger had written, "The car won't start. It says system failure on the dashboard. I called a tow truck, but it will take 4 hours." I laughed to myself. The remote security system I had installed was working perfectly. On Sunday night, I got a call from the Miami airport. It was an airline employee. "Mr. Thompson? This is Kevin from American Airlines. I have your family here trying to board a flight home, but it looks like there's a credit card issue." "Kevin," I said calmly, "they are not my financial responsibility. Good luck to them." And I hung up. On Monday morning, while reviewing the numbers with Stephen, I discovered something that made me even more determined. Over the past 2 years, Laura and her family had spent $68,000 of my money. $68,000. Expensive dinners, designer clothes, gadgets for the grandchildren, trips I wasn't invited on. $68,000 for people who thought I was getting in the way of their fun. That's when I made my final decision. Not just about the money, about everything. I called a moving company. "I need you to remove all of my daughter's belongings from her house. Everything that was purchased with my money." "Sir, does that include furniture, appliances?" "Everything. I paid for the house, I paid for the furniture. She has 72 hours to find a new place to live." Because they were about to find out that when you throw away someone who has supported you your entire life, you lose more than a person. You lose a lifestyle. And tomorrow, when they finally got home, they would find much more than an empty house. They would find a new reality. On Tuesday morning, Laura and her family finally made it home. 2 weeks of Easter vacation had turned into a 72-hour nightmare at the Miami airport. They saw the car I had remotely blocked get towed away, slept on airport benches, bought last-minute tickets with money borrowed from friends, and returned home humiliated and exhausted. I was on my porch when the taxi pulled up in front of the house. Laura got out first, her hair disheveled, still wearing the same clothes she had worn 3 days ago. Roger looked 10 years older, carrying broken suitcases. The grandchildren followed behind, silent for the first time in years. They headed straight for the front door, but couldn't get in. The locks had been changed. Laura banged on the door with increasing force. Dad, open this door. We need to talk." I let them knock for 5 full minutes before appearing at the window. "The house keys are under the mat," I said through the glass. You have exactly 1 hour to gather your personal belongings, clothes, sentimental items, photographs. Everything that was purchased with my money stays. Laura turned pale. Dad, what are you saying? This is our house. No, I replied calmly. This is my house. I bought it, financed it, and have paid the bills for 15 years. You are tenants who have just been evicted. Roger exploded. You can't do this. Are you crazy? We have rights. Rights. I repeated, opening the window a little wider. You talked about rights when you excluded me from the trip I paid for? You talked about rights when you celebrated my absence publicly. That's when I showed them my cell phone, with the family group open to the messages they had sent at the airport. Good thing Frank stayed home. Now we can really enjoy ourselves, I read Roger's message aloud. Without having to talk quietly because Grandpa is tired. It's going to be epic. Laura tried to interrupt, but I continued, that's right. And without having to listen to stories about how everything was better in the 70s. Felipe, my grandson, wrote that. The same Felipe the first taught to ride a bike, who I took fishing every Saturday for 8 years. Felipe looked at the floor, ashamed, but it was too late for regrets. You have 55 minutes, I said, closing the window. I watched through the curtains as they ran around the house, filling bags with clothes and personal belongings. Laura cried as she gathered family photos. Roger tried to take some electronics, but stopped when he saw the note stuck to the television, purchased by Frank Thompson in March 2021. Property of the owner of the house. Every piece of furniture, every appliance, every decoration had a similar note. 15 years of my life built with my money, now clearly identified as my property. When the time was up, they were on the sidewalk with 4 trash bags full of clothes and a few personal items. Nothing else. Dad, Laura begged, tears streaming down her face. Please don't do this. We're your family. Family. I replied from the window. Family votes to exclude the patriarch from important moments. Family celebrates when the oldest is left behind. Family treats those who support them like dead weight. That's when I dropped the final bombshell. Laura, you have 1 week to find a lawyer and review the new will I signed on Monday. You and your children have been completely removed. Everything I've built over 74 years of life now goes to David, my nephew in Seattle. The same David who calls me every week to see how I am, who has never asked me for a penny, who treats me with respect. The silence that followed was deafening. Laura fell to her knees on the sidewalk. Roger started yelling threats about lawsuits. Felipe finally lifted his head, his eyes wide with shock. Grandpa, you can't, our whole life. Your entire life has been built on disrespect, I replied. You've spent $68,000 of my money over the last 2 years. $68,000 for people who thought I was getting in the way of your fun. Sophie, my granddaughter who had ignored me for over a year, finally spoke. Grandpa, I didn't know. You knew, Sophie. All of you knew exactly how you treated me. The difference is that now you also know what it's like to live without me. A neighbor, Mr. Martinez, who had been watching the whole scene from his window, approached Laura with a piece of paper in his hands. Ma'am, Mr. Thompson asked me to give you this when you left. It was an official notice. The house had been put up for sale. Laura had 48 hours to remove any remaining items before the real estate agent took control. Where are we going to live? Laura whispered. That's no longer my responsibility, I replied. You are independent adults who made your choices. Now live with them. It was then that Laura realized the full extent of what had happened. It wasn't just the canceled trip or the blocked cards. It was the complete end of the structure that held their lives together. Dad, she said, her voice breaking, we can fix this. We can talk, we can. We can nothing, Laura. You had decades to treat me with respect. You chose to treat me like an inconvenience. Now you get to experience what it's like to be truly inconvenient. No home, no money, no support. As they walked away with their bags, calling an Uber they would pay for with the last dollars they had, I closed the curtains and returned to my armchair. For the first time in years, the house was completely silent. There was no one interrupting me, no one changing the channel without asking, no one complaining about my stories. I made some coffee and called David in Seattle. Uncle Frank. How was your vacation? Let's just say I learned a lot about real family, I replied. David, do you have a few minutes? I need to tell you about some changes to my will. On the other end of the line, I heard the sound of a child laughing. David's son, my 5-year-old grandnephew, who always sends me drawings in the mail. Real family, I discovered, isn't who shares your blood. It's who values your time. And while Laura and her family were discovering what it means to live without financial support, I was rediscovering what it means to live without emotional baggage. Revenge wasn't complete yet. One last lesson remained. 3 months had passed since Laura and her family left home with their trash bags full of clothes. 3 months that completely transformed not only their lives, but mine as well. David arrived from Seattle the week after the confrontation, bringing his wife Jennifer and my 5-year-old grandnephew Tommy. They came not to judge or question my decisions, but simply to offer support. Uncle Frank, David said to me as we drank coffee on the porch, you did what you had to do. Family isn't who you share your DNA with, it's who you share your values with. Tommy, with his childlike innocence, asked, Grandpa Frank, why didn't your grandchildren like you? The question hit me like a punch in the stomach, but it also brought me clarity. I explained to him, in simple words, that sometimes people forget to be grateful for those who love them. But I'll never forget Grandpa Frank, he said, hugging me. At that moment, I realized I had found my real family. I heard from neighbors that Laura was living in a 1-bedroom apartment on the cheaper side of town. Roger had lost 3 important contracts when his clients found out he no longer had a permanent office or address. Felipe had to leave private school and enroll in public school. Sophie got a part-time job at a fast food restaurant to help with expenses. I didn't feel any pleasure in learning about these difficulties. I only felt confirmation that actions have consequences. Mr. Martinez, my neighbor, told me that Laura had stopped by the house several times in the first few weeks, sitting on the sidewalk for hours, staring at the windows. He said she cried a lot, but never knocked on the door. I think she understood Frank, he told me. She understood that some mistakes can't be excused with tears. The house sold in 2 weeks. I used the money to pay off my mortgage and invested the rest in an education fund for Tommy, my new real heir. David and his family decided to move permanently to our town. He got a great job as a software engineer, and they bought a house 3 blocks from mine. Now, every Thursday, Tommy comes fishing with me on the same lake where I used to take Felipe. The difference is that Tommy really wants to learn. He asks questions about the bait, stays quiet when he needs to, and genuinely celebrates when I tell stories from the old days. Tell me again about when you built your first house, Grandpa Frank, he always asks. And I do, because I finally have someone who values my experience instead of mocking her. Robert Chun, my lawyer, visited me last week to finalize the details of my new will. He told me that Laura had sought legal counsel to try to contest the changes, but gave up when she discovered she had no legal basis. Frank, can I tell you something? Robert asked. In 30 years of practicing law, I've never seen anyone document a family exclusion so meticulously. You kept evidence of everything, the group messages, the excessive spending, even recordings of family conversations. If she tried to challenge it, she would only humiliate herself further. I smiled. 40 years as an engineer had taught me that details matter, and documentation is everything. Stephen Rodriguez, my accountant, presented the final audit report. Over the past 5 years, Laura and her family had spent $123,000 of my money. $123,000 for people who considered me too inconvenient for a family trip. What strikes me most, Stephen commented, is that they never asked where the money came from. They just assumed it was theirs. On the eve of Father's Day, ironically, 6 months after they were disinherited, Laura showed up at my door. She was thinner, with gray hair that hadn't been there before, and clothes that had clearly seen better days. Dad, she said when I opened the door, can I come in? Just for 5 minutes. I let her in, but remained standing. I didn't offer her coffee or invite her to sit down. Dad, I wanted to tell you that I understand. I understand what we did. It was cruel, it was unfair, and you didn't deserve it. Laura, I replied calmly, you understand the consequences. That's different from understanding the mistake. She started to cry. Dad, we've lost everything. Roger is going bankrupt, the boys are suffering at their new school, we need help. And when I needed respect. When I needed to be treated like a father, not a bank. Did you help me? Dad, please, we're your family. No, I replied with a firmness that surprised even me. Family is people who value you when you're around, not people who come to you when they need something. My family now is David, Jennifer, and Tommy. They call me to see how I am, not to ask for money. Laura left 10 minutes later, more devastated than when she arrived. That night, David called me as he did every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. How was your day, Uncle Frank? Tommy is looking forward to our fishing trip on Saturday. It was a day of closure, I replied. And new beginnings. Now, at 74, I have discovered something I never knew before, the difference between being respected and being used. For decades, I confused providing with loving, giving money with giving value. My new routine includes breakfast with David on Fridays, fishing with Tommy on Saturdays, and Sunday dinners with my new family, a family that chose me not out of obligation or interest, but out of genuine affection. Last week, Tommy brought me a drawing he made at school. It was of the two of us fishing, with a huge yellow sun and a bright blue lake. At the bottom, he had written in his childish handwriting, "My grandpa Frank is my hero." I put the drawing on the refrigerator, in the same place where Laura and her family's photos used to be. The irony is that now, at 74, I am more valued and respected than ever. Not because of my money. David is financially independent and has never asked me for a penny. I am valued for who I am, a man with stories to tell, experience to share, and love to give. If you've made it to the end of this story about how I learned the difference between blood family and family of the heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to reclaim our dignity and find people who truly value us. Yesterday, I ran into Roger at the supermarket. He saw me first and clearly considered whether he should say hello. When our eyes met, I saw something in him I had never seen before, genuine shame. He approached hesitantly and said, "Frank, I wish I could take it back." "Roger," I replied, putting my groceries in the cart, "some mistakes serve as education. You learned that discarding people has consequences. I've learned that I deserve better than ingratitude disguised as family love." And I walked away, leaving him standing there between the aisles, finally understanding that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Today, as I write these words on the porch that witnessed my humiliation 6 months ago, I hear Tommy playing in the backyard with David. They are building a tree house, a project we planned together, where my experience as an engineer is celebrated, not ridiculed. The last I heard, Laura was working as a receptionist at a dental clinic. Felipe got a partial scholarship to a state university. Sophie is still working at the diner, saving money to help her family. I don't hate them. I feel peace. Because I've learned that a man's worth isn't measured by what he can offer financially, but by the respect he can maintain for himself. And when you respect yourself enough to walk away from those who don't value you, you discover that the world is full of people who recognize your true worth. Revenge wasn't about destroying those who hurt me, it was about rebuilding my own dignity. And today, for the first time in decades, I can honestly say, I am a happy man, respected and loved by people who deserve my love in return. True family is those who stand by you by choice, not by obligation. And if you're young and watching this, remember, treat your parents well while they're here. Because when you need them back, you can't always get back what you've lost.